James Morrow, Annelise Nielsen have been watching on as well. I might start with you, Annelise. What did you take out of that speech?
Well, yeah, I tend to agree with Kieran about his performance. I think we do need to talk about it, given we've been saying that this would be a measure of his mental fitness for many Americans. If that was the Joe Biden we were seeing every day, I don't think this would be a discussion. He certainly brought the energy, and a few stumbles in a 1-hour speech, not to be unexpected. And there were quite a few moments off the cuff as well, not least when he accepted that badge of Laken Riley's name. Now, she's a 22-year-old student from a university in Georgia, who was kidnapped and murdered on campus. A man who's from Venezuela and walked over the border into the US has been charged with her kidnapping and murder. And so this has become a real flashpoint in the immigration debate as those numbers hit record highs. And I don't know how well that answer landed. It seemed off the cuff, but not to the point. And that is going to be something that I think will come up again in the year, as this is a huge issue that's been very much in the Republican strength about the issues at the southern border. And you can see that the Biden administration's feeling more pressure on this. We've had Joe Biden go to the southern border, but I don't think that was covered off well in that speech at all. But it's also notable, I think, that he went straight for Ukraine off the top, apparently skipping Mike Johnson, introducing him formally. I think that was a bit of a mistake. That's normally a bit of a bipartisan thing, that you let the speaker introduce you. But what we did see was the fact he went to that at the beginning. That was a pointed thing, because the US Congress is so divided on this. They've had so much trouble passing funding recently. And while there's been some probably more sensible divides over things like the US funding, civil servants in Ukraine has been a real flashpoint where Republicans have just simply drawn the line and said no. The concern is, especially if Donald Trump comes back, that support's going to go. The theory is that this is why Mitch McConnell has stepped down with an endorsement for Donald Trump, to try and line up a bit of a truce, and so that they can get this funding through. But it is going to be a pressure point. And it is interesting, again, to see the president go for a foreign policy thing right off the top instead of something more domestic.
Yeah, and I suppose that will be one to watch. And Donald Trump is asked about exactly what his plans might be. James Morrow, on that migration aspect, I thought it was really interesting that Joe Biden, when he got these barbs, he wanted to try to take them on. He used the word killed by an illegal as well. This is often language you don't hear as much on the Democratic side. Is this him sort of trying to toughen up a bit in this particular area ahead of an election?
Well, this is a huge, huge weak spot for Joe Biden and the entire Democrat Party, really, which has gone, from being, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. You go back to what people like even Barack Obama were saying about the need for a strong border and for being, detaining people who come in illegally and deporting people, to where we are now, where the Democrats have, under Joe Biden, let somewhere between 7 and 8 million people just waltz across the border, essentially, and come and settle, and it's caused all sorts of dislocation, particularly in Democrat cities, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, all around the country. So it's a huge, huge problem for them. He was trying to talk tough, but it doesn't work, and it's not landing. And all of that stuff that he was talking about the border bill, none of that was actually about slowing down the number of people coming in or deporting them or detaining them. It's just about processing them in a more efficient manner. That whole thing about, they can shut down the border when there's too many people coming through. Well, that's nonsense, because in his first 100 days in office, Joe Biden signed or repealed something like 94 executive orders, things he could do as president today and turn around, and he weakened the border. So this is a problem entirely of his own making, and now he's like an arsonist saying, hey, look at me, come help me put out this fire I started.
Kieran, I just want to get to you as well on Roe versus Wade, because we know for real conservatives, if you like, within the Republican Party, one of the things they feel like Donald Trump delivered on best was the Supreme Court. Is Joe Biden trying to sort of flip that and highlight through Roe v. Wade, perhaps trying to get turnout going on the Democratic side in the same way on the left of his party?
100%. And that was such an interesting moment at the State of the Union, where he was addressing the members of the Supreme Court about that very ruling, Tom. And we saw the visibility of the female members of Congress, many of them wearing white in honour and recalling the suffragette movement. This again to raise awareness about female reproductive rights. And at one moment as well during the State of the Union, there was a reference to, and our viewers might not be across it, but there's been a controversial case in Alabama where the court has ruled that IVF, that it raised doubts over IVF and comparing some of those treatments to babies, basically, and making that IVF, the future of IVF in Alabama, a huge issue right now. The governor has since intervened, but it's become a big matter in the United States. Biden referenced IVF. He got huge applause from the Democrats. And then apparently inside, watching a few correspondents talking about this, they're saying that essentially the Republicans didn't know whether to applaud or not, because many of them have come out in the wake of that Alabama court ruling in support of IVF. So they wanted to applaud some of them. The Democrats applauded very forcefully. But again, within that broader issue of female reproductive rights, I think this is something that Biden needs to focus on, because as we know, and as Annelise, James and all of us have spoken about over months, it's all about turnout this year. Yeah. How can two individuals with both having problematic issues in terms of the voting percentages that don't want them to run again, how do they get people out to vote?